Today we are talking to Chuck from the Sherton Park Farms, who is an expert at raising pigs, chickens, turkeys, and more on their farm. We're going to see how much profit you can potentially make with raising pigs as a side hustle and what is needed for you to get started making money with pigs today. Now let's jump right into the interview. All right, awesome. So now we have Chuck here from Sherton Park Farms, who are going to be asking a lot of questions all about raising pigs, everything we need to know, how to get started, how profitable it will be. And we have a lot of questions, so let's dive right into it. And the first question we have is, how long have you been raising pigs for? And you'll tell us a little bit about your farm.
Sure. And first off, Kevin, thanks for the invite. I really appreciate you inviting us to be on. So yeah, my name is Chuck Lewis. My wife and I own Sherton Park Farms. We're located in the northwestern corner, kind of North Carolina. We're right in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. We own a 70-acre farm here. We bought this farm that we're on right now. We bought this farm actually about a year ago to the date. We closed on the first week of October. Prior to that, we were on a smaller farm down in the central part of North Carolina where we really kind of got started. And we had an opportunity because of COVID and, work our regular jobs moving to more online stuff and more virtual work. We had the opportunity to come back here, which is really where we're from. So, that's kind of where we are and how we got here.
That's awesome. And then at that smaller farm, how long were you there for? Did you have prior experience raising pigs there, or is this something new that came with the new bigger farm?
Yeah, so a little bit of background on that. So a number of years ago, actually, I guess 6 or 7 years ago, my wife Sandra decided that she wanted to learn to do butcher work, how to work in a butcher shop. She's a fantastic cook, and she wanted to learn that aspect of it. And so she done a summer internship at a small butcher shop. Came home one day and said, "Hey, I think there's something to this locally grown, know your food, know your farmer movement." And I kind of shrugged it off, and I said, "Yeah, I'm sure there probably is." And I went on about watching TV or whatever it was I was doing. So then one night we kind of spooling through YouTube or Netflix or something, and we came upon the movie Food Inc. And we watched that, and it was just a real eye opener into the industrialized food system and sort of where folks are getting their food from now. And there was a guy on there, his name is Joel Salatin, and that was my first introduction to him. So I started reading some of his books and watching some of his videos, and I said, I think there's something to this. Well, as fate would have it, about that time, I was in the middle of a job change that was going to require us to move. So we were living on a 1 acre lot with a yard and a driveway. That was it. We had a very small garden. We grew a few tomato plants. So we decided, okay, let's buy a little land and raise some of our own food. So we found a small 20-acre farm about an hour from where my new job was going to be, and we bought that. And so that was in the summer of 2017. And so we were going to really start farming in earnest in 2018. That was kind of our goal. That's what we're going to do. And we were going to start out with chickens. We were going to go all in on raising broilers or meat chickens. And so I was driving back and forth to work, and man, I was consuming all the content I could consume: YouTube videos, podcast, books, everything. And I was listening to a podcast, and the guy on there said, hour for hour, pound for pound, based on your effort, pigs are more profitable than chickens. Sure. So I came home that evening and I made the grand announcement to my wife, we're getting pigs. And so fast forward to February, the week of Valentine's Day, February 2018, we had ordered, I think it was 50 meat chickens. And I had gone on Craigslist and found 6 pigs. And so with zero experience, and within the course of about 3 days, we went from 0 to 50 chickens and 6 pigs. Wow. I would not recommend that to anyone without any experience. Probably not the best way to get started in the farming business, but that's what happened. So we had a lot of baptism by fire. Since then, real quick, we've grown. This year, we'll process about 60 pigs. We'll process and sell about 1,700 to 1,800 chickens. We'll do about 25 beef cattle and about 200 turkeys. And we'll sell a couple thousand dozen eggs. So Yeah, we started this. This is our 5th full year farming, but we got our first animals the week of February 14th, 2018, a date that will live in infamy for us.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's awesome. Like background upbringing story. I guess there's a lot to unpack there. But like the first question I have is, when you guys originally made the purchase to that first 20-acre farm for your other full-time job, was it anything to do with farming or anything to, give you guidance, or is it something completely different field than, what you do today?
Yeah, so I've been in healthcare for 30 years, and my wife was in healthcare for about 20. She decided to step away, and she works in an accounting office now, and we both basically work virtually. But at the time, we just wanted to buy some land that would give us enough space to produce enough food for ourselves, and that was the original intent of those first chickens and those first pigs. And we kind of decided, well, we've got an abundance here. We've got more than we need. Let's go to a couple of farmers markets and just see if we can sell anything. And so we started going to the closest farmers market to our house. And this thing is it's amazing at how quickly it's grown and how many folks are really interested in knowing where their food comes from, who their farmer is, that the food that they're buying was ethically raised without a lot of chemicals and hormones and antibiotics and all of those extra, external inputs. That's sort of how we've grown. It's been very, very organic.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess kind of going back to when you said you originally got all the animals with the chickens and the pigs, you said it was, a huge learning curve. Could you go more into that? Like, was there certain equipment that you needed to get started? Is there other things you wish you would have known before, you dove basically right into the deep end?
Yeah, so we had zero experience. Neither my wife nor I had any farming experience whatsoever. We had grown a little bit of a garden, and then growing up as kids, our parents and our grandparents had gardens, and I think her grandparents had some chickens, but it was nothing that we were ever really involved with, especially on any kind of production scale. So for us, it was really, it was kind of consuming that content that was out there. YouTube, podcast, there are some books out there that we had picked up and read. And so, intellectually, we kind of had the basics down. It's really easy to figure out, okay, what equipment do you need? How much space do you need? All those kinds of things. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. And I tell folks that reach out to me that have questions all the time, you can read about it, you can watch, you can study, you can paralysis by analysis yourself to death until you actually get those animals. That's when the learning starts. Until you get those animals on your property and you actually start caring for them and you've got that day-to-day interaction. That's when you really learn how to do this kind of thing.
Definitely. Yeah. I think a lot of it, even though they're like side hustles or investing in real estate, there's only so much you can learn online and stuff through friends and get recommendations, but until you fully dive into it, you kind of need that hands-on experience in order to fully understand what you're trying to do.
Without a doubt. And, kind of talking about side hustles and kind of add-on things, that's another thing that we do now is we do some on-farm classes. So for those folks that are interested in getting into this kind of business, they can come out to our farm and they can actually be on a piece of property with those animals, see, touch, feel the equipment, and talk through some of those things. So it provides a little bit of a jump start. It's sort of an intermediate step between that reading and learning and then the actual having. And so that for us, that's an extra income, but that's a different story for a different day.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we could break that down a little bit later. We talk more about revenues and different income streams. But I guess as far as getting back to raising like the pigs, like what equipment is needed? Could I basically just go buy some piglets and, buy some fencing? I'm good to go, or what is there?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend that. So a couple things that you're going to need. First off, I would definitely recommend buying small piglets, piglets that have been weaned or have just been taken off of their mom. And I would recommend for folks that are interested, either buy females or make sure that you buy males that have been castrated. You don't want a boar, especially if you've never had pigs before, because boars can get kind of big. They can get kind of aggressive. And there's also an issue. There can also be some issues with the quality of meat whenever it comes processing time. But finding a good local source of piglets, someone that has pigs on their property, That will allow you to see their entire operation. If they have the parents on site, which they usually will, you want to see the parents and look at the entire operation. Are the animals well fed? Are they well cared for? Are they in a good environment? Do they have plenty of fresh, clean water? Just you can kind of tell if someone cares about their animals or not. You really don't want to be buying animals from somebody that's kind of sketchy. And I've heard a lot of horror stories of folks doing that. So, yeah, first off, find some piglets, find a good source of those piglets, and then some equipment that you're going to need on your property. You're going to need some kind of fencing. That's the number one thing that you need to be thinking about early on is your fencing. You want to keep those animals on your property. You don't want them in the neighbor's yard digging through their flower garden. You don't want them in the neighbor's yard digging up their grass. That can make for kind of a rough relationship with your neighbor. So make sure that you've got a fence. I recommend there are pieces of fence that they're called hog panels. You can get them at a lot of feed and seed stores, Tractor Supply, garden supply stores, and it's a 16-foot welded wire panel. And, depending on how many pigs you get, I would get at least 4 of those. And you can set up just a small pen. It's going to be a 16-foot by 16-foot pen. And then you're going to need some kind of way to feed those animals. So you'll need some bowls, and you can get some big plastic bowls, or, you can buy those at feed and seed stores. You can you can take old barrels and cut the majority of the barrel off so that you got, like a 10-inch tall feed trough there. So you'll need a bowl to put their feed in. And then you're going to need some kind of way to water those animals. And there are a couple different ways to do that. Good way to start with piglets. We buy, it's just a 55-gallon pickle barrel. And you can go down to the feed and seed store or the Tractor Supply, and you can get a thing called a pig nipple. And it's basically a little thing that goes through the wall of the barrel, fill the barrel up with water, the pig goes up, the pig bites down on the nipple, and then it opens up the flow and lets the water flow. Housing, depending on where you're at on the face of the earth. If you're in a cold climate, you want to make sure that those animals have maybe got a little shed or a little hutch or something that they can get in, especially during the cold weather, so that they can get out of the wind and out of the rain and the snow and that kind of thing. And in the summertime, you want to make sure that they've got a little bit of shade. Pigs that are white in color, a lot of like landrace and Yorkshire and some of those animals that actually have a white hair on them, those animals will sunburn, and it's very uncomfortable for them. Darker animals, Durocs and Berkshires and Herefords and some of those kinds of pigs, they're more of a colorful pig, and they won't sunburn. So the 3 things that we always talk about when we do daily chores is feed, fence, and water. And those are that's the 3-legged stool that you always want to be paying attention to. Do you have good fence? Do the animals have access to good, clean water? And do they have access to feed?
Okay. Say if you wanted to go back to what you're saying, like the 16 by 16 fence, maybe like 4 piglets, and set up water and feed. How much would you kind of estimate to get that like basic setup up?
Yeah, so the fence panels are going to run, they're about $25 a piece now, so you're going to be $100 in on fencing. Piglets, that can run the gamut. I've seen I have bought piglets as cheap as $35, and I have sold piglets as expensive as $150. So that's a little bit of shopping around, but I would budget about $100 for a piglet. So if you're going to do 4 piglets, there's $400 plus the $100 for the fencing that you got. So you're in for $500 with 4 piglets. Your bowls and your pig nipples and those kinds of things, those are just kind of incidental costs that really aren't going to be very expensive. I'd budget maybe another, $50 for those kinds of things.
Okay, so we're kind of looking at maybe like $550 if you want to start from the ground up with 4
Yep.
piglets. Okay.
Yeah, that's going to get you started. And then, depending on how you want to raise these animals, 4 piglets is going to look different inside of that 16 by 16 fencing area than 4 300-pound pigs. That's going to look, those are 2 totally different things, 2 completely different things.
Yeah.
So what we do when we have those piglets in that little 16 by 16 pen, we'll take some electric fence wire and we'll run electric fence wire along the inside of that. We call it a training pen, and we electrify it. And piglets are very, very smart. After about 2 days, when they go up to that wire, they figure They don't want to touch that thing. They don't want anything to do with it. Frankly, after about a week, we can take those 16-foot pig panels down, and we can keep a piglet inside of an area with just a single strand of electric wire. And that gives you, now you have a ton of options on where you can move those pigs to. You can set up areas that are half acre in size, an acre in size, 5 acres in size, with just a single strand of electric, and give those animals a lot of space and a lot of area to roam and move and that kind of thing. And from an environmental and from a, just from a land management perspective, you really want to do that, because if you think about 4 pigs in a 16 by 16 area, over time, that becomes a lot of manure. And that does 2 things. Number one, it stinks up the neighborhood. And number 2, it's really not good for the soil because it can't absorb all of that. So you want to spread those animals out. So that's something else that you're going to have to think about. But, $550, $600, that's going to get you started. And then electric wire, fencing, fence post, and an energizer and all that kind of thing to get that up and going. You're going to be looking at probably about another $500, give or take a little bit. But keep in mind, all of these materials that you're buying are reusable. So it's not a one and done thing. So the equipment that you're buying, you can go back and reuse that for another set of piglets and another and another and another and another. So it's an initial investment in the infrastructure so that you can continue to grow and expand and do more animals over time.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it has that upfront cost, but over, say, several seasons of raising pigs, that you could, really average it out to a pretty manageable price then.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I still have 16-foot pig panels, that those original ones that I bought for that first group of pigs. I still have original fence posts, fence and wire, energizers. I've still got all of that stuff, and we've had it for 5 years. And, we've gone through a couple of 100 pigs now.
Oh, wow. What about, is there, basically going back to the land, is there a set ratio you want to get, 1 pig per, a certain acreage, whether it's a quarter or is there a general rule of thumb when it comes to that?
So it kind of depends on the area that you're in. Are you in a wet area? Are you in a dry area, wooded versus more open field? And so that's really going to vary depending on where you're at. Where we're at in northwestern North Carolina, 6 to 7 per acre is kind of the number that we shoot for. And again, we want to make sure that we're not getting a real heavy manure load. We're not creating a lot of stink. We're spreading that manure, and that, it's essentially fertilizer, and it works great. We're kind of spreading that out. We don't have large concentrations of it. Also, pigs are pretty destructive. You put a group of pigs on a half-acre lot, depending on the size of those animals, in just a couple of days, they can have that spot looking like it can go from a nice grassy area to looking like the surface of the moon. I mean, they can really, and then you're talking about erosion problems, and so one of the practices that we follow is we rotationally move those pigs. So we'll have a group of pigs on an area for a little while, then we'll move it, we'll move them back, a half acre. We'll move them to the right a half acre. We'll move them to the, we just kind of keep them moving around. That distributes our manure. It gets good disturbance of the soil, which is, a lot of benefits from that. And also it gives the animals more of a natural diet. Pigs take in a lot of green material. They eat a lot of grass. And if you're in a hardwood forest like we are, they eat a lot of nuts, acorns, black walnuts, hickory nuts, beech nuts. There's a lot of mast and a lot of protein that falls from the trees that supplements their diet.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of pros with, rotating them to different pastures. I guess, is it even practical then to kind of raise them in a 16 by 16, little pen that we're talking about before? Or is that basically you only want to do that starting out and then eventually kind of, go to rotating different pastures?
So it can be done. It can be done. And I've seen folks that do that, and they follow what's called the deep bedding method. And they will put those animals in and 4 inside of a 16 by 16, that's probably a little tight. Okay. 16 by 16, if you're going to go from piglet to full-size pig, 2 is probably plenty. 2 is probably plenty enough pigs to have in that area. But what folks will do is they put them in there and they leave them in there. But over time, they add a lot of carbon. They put in a lot of hay, a lot of wood chips, sawdust, anything that will kind of soak up the manure and will kind of neutralize some of that nitrogen that's in the manure of those pigs. That reduces a lot of the smell. that stirs up. It can make a very, very nice compost to use as garden fertilizer or on your fields or something like that. I've seen some guys that would take, they would go on to Craigslist or Marketplace or something like that, and they would buy one of these old metal carports, like a 2-car carport, kind of a steel structure, an A-frame deal. Set that up, put up a little bit of fencing around the outside, and then fence that thing in. And that's basically the area that they keep their pigs in from beginning to end. But every few days they go in and they add more wood chips or hay or sawdust or more carbon. And it just builds up. You get a deeper and deeper bedding and a deeper layer that absorbs all that manure. Works out great for the pigs. And then whenever they move out, those guys will just go in there and scoop that up, take it out, and spread it on their field, and makes fantastic fertilizer.
Okay. So it sounds like, yeah, it's definitely doable, but it might take a little bit more effort with, putting in more wood chips or something like along those lines in order to actually make it, as efficient as possible then.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more management intensive like that.
Okay. I think that makes, a lot of sense. You kind of touched on it before, but what was the reasons why, you decided to go with raising pigs instead of, say, a different, type of animal, or maybe a different side hustle all in total,
So when we were thinking about getting started in farming, we wanted to do more than one thing. We were going to start with chickens, but we had a long-term goal of adding other animals. We wanted to be a polyculture farm. We didn't want to be a chicken farm or a pig farm or a cattle farm. And so that was part of it, was adding just another species. And then after doing a little bit of research, pigs turned out to be pretty daggone profitable for us. And the numbers kind of flushed out on paper that they were going to be a good profitable enterprise. And so it was a couple of different factors, multiple animals on the farm, and then they are profitable for us.
Okay. And I guess how long does it take to raise a pig from a piglet to a full grown pig? Is this something you could do multiple times in a year, or is it, it takes a full year or even longer to go throughout that process?
So it depends on breed. And if you're going to be doing this on an enterprise scale, or you're going to be doing it as an enterprise to make money, I would recommend going with a pretty conventional farm breed, something like a Duroc or a Berkshire. If you're more of a homesteader and you don't care how long it takes, then, you can talk about the breeds like the Cooney and the Idaho Pasture Pig and the Mangalistas and some of those kinds of breeds. But if you buy an 8-week-old piglet, we can take an 8-week-old piglet, and in 6 months, from the time we bring that 8-week-old piglet onto our farm, in 6 months, have that animal at slaughter size somewhere around the 300 to 325 pound range. Yes, you can do that multiple times in a year. And the best way to do that is maybe you buy 2 8-week-old piglets now. Then next month you buy 2 more 8-week-old piglets. Then the next month you buy 2 8-week-old piglets. And so you stack those so you have animals that are ready to be processed at multiple months along the way. So you've always got something in the pipeline, so to speak. And so that gives you sort of this ongoing supply that you can continue to process. Mixing pigs of different sizes and different ages works fine. We've done it, and we do it now. There's always a little bit of what we call the piggy wars the first couple of days, figuring out that pecking order whenever you mix them up. But yeah, you can do it multiple times over a year.
Okay, that's good to hear. And yeah, I think that's a great idea, doing it, kind of stacking it per month or whatever you decided. Does it make, I'm sure, the revenue a lot more predictable when you're going to get processed then? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, kind of talking about processing, like say you have your pigs that are full grown, what do you do then? Do you send them off to get processed, or what's your, I guess, task once it's ready to go get processed?
Yeah, so if you're going to sell these animals retail to the public, they have to be processed at a federally inspected, USDA inspected slaughterhouse. There are USDA, small USDA slaughterhouses all over the country. You just have to find out, who's local to you and who can get you in, who can get an appointment. Since COVID kind of came along, a lot of these small processors have seen huge upticks in folks wanting to get animals processed. For example, pre-COVID, we could call our processor on Monday morning and say, hey, we've got 3 pigs we need to get processed. When can y'all get them in? And they would say, how does Wednesday look? So in 2 days, we can have them down there. After COVID came along, we were 6, 8, 12 months before we could get an animal in. We were scheduling appointments for processing of animals that had not been born on our farm yet. That's how far out we were scheduling those processing dates. That's eased up a little bit. That's not quite as tight as it was, but if someone's interested in getting into pigs, as soon as you get them, I'd be trying to find a local processor or somebody that can process those animals for you. And again, if you're selling to the public, if you're going to sell retail, it has to be done at a USDA inspected facility.
It's pretty crazy to hear how it went from a couple of days to months or even up to like a year. Is that just because so many more people were getting into, homestead or farming or raising different animals? Or do you think it's just like the lack of, people that are able to service?
Yeah. So a lot, there were a couple of factors that kind of played into that. Number one, a lot of the large processing plants like the Smithfield plants and Cargill plants and some of those guys that were doing big processing for industrial size capacity, they were having a lot of labor issues. So farmers were stuck with a lot of animals that they couldn't do anything with. They couldn't get them processed. So they started turning to those local smaller processors, and they were taking up tons of appointments and that kind of thing. That was sort of the first wave. Then that second wave that we started seeing were folks that were just getting into it. They kind of got a little spooked by the whole deal. We saw some meat shortage kinds of things. So folks were buying animals. They were going down to their farm down the road, and they said, "Hey, can we buy a cow from you and have it processed and put it in a freezer?" So there was a lot of that kind of thing that was coming up too. Since then, again, it's gotten somewhat easier, but we've seen a lot of folks get into this space, and a lot of folks get into this local farming space like what we're doing. And frankly, there's not a lot of processors around. There are some, but that's been one of the major holdups in regenerative agriculture is having access to processors.
Okay, yeah, I think it's very interesting and makes sense. But yeah, hopefully that continues to go down with the time frame. But yeah, kind of leading us into our next question. Say you sent your pigs out to get processed and you get them back. What do you do there if you want to sell them retail?
Yeah, so one thing I tell folks that when they come to me asking about this kind of thing, start your marketing before you ever get those animals. Go ahead and tell friends and family, "Hey, we're thinking about getting into farming and we're going to be raising some pigs, and this is how we're going to do it. This is when we're going to get them processed, and this is the method we're going to raise them. This is what we're going to feed them," and get folks interested in what you're doing before you ever get those animals. Get a fan base, start you a social media page, get you an email list, talk to all your friends, your family, whoever will listen to you talk about your farm, and get folks interested in purchasing from you. I tell folks, I would rather show up at a farmer's market and have 50 people in line and sell out of stuff in the first hour than to show up at a market and there's crickets, nobody around to buy. So start recruiting your customers as soon as you get, or even before you get those animals. And then once you do get them, and once you get that processing back, hopefully you've done your due diligence and you've got that fan base built. You got some customers that are ready to buy. If not, you got to get out there and get your stuff in front of folks. Farmers markets are a great way to kind of start building a customer base. That was really where we kind of started was doing farmers markets. Finding folks that are interested in locally grown, clean food. I'll tell you, CrossFit gyms are a great place. Those folks are always looking for clean protein. I mean, that's a good place to go stick a flyer up on. They've always got a bulletin board. That's a great place to go stick a flyer up. Find a local farm to table restaurant and see if, hey, can maybe we give you a little bit of product and you try that product and maybe get a little advertising out of it. So the marketing, it becomes kind of, you've got to figure out how to market, how to get your name out there, how to get your story out there, how to let folks know that you're in business. But you got to do that early. Don't wait till you're going and picking those pigs up in that cooler and looking around saying, wonder who's going to buy this. You're behind the 8 ball.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I feel like it's always thinking about the next step ahead and, making sure that you're prepared. So that's a great point. And yeah, being creative about who you reach out to. A lot of people are, like we kind of talked about before, are a lot more health conscious and more conscious where the food is coming from, especially with like being in the news and Netflix documentaries. So yeah, going to different gyms and other people that are conscious of that. I think that's a great little tip right there.
Yeah.
What about now? So we have our pigs, we're at the farmer's market and we're selling them. What could we kind of expect? Like the big question a lot of people want to know is how much money can you make with raising pigs?
So we get this question all the time. How much should I charge for a pound of bacon? How much should I charge for a pork chop? So what we tell folks is the first thing you have to know is, what are your costs? How much did it cost you to get that animal in that package in front of that customer? We're talking, what did the animal cost? How much feed cost do you have? What cost do you have in your infrastructure, and how are you amortizing that out over multiple batches of animals? What was your labor? You've always got to include your labor, because your time is, that's the thing you can't replace. You can buy more pigs, you can buy more fence, you can't replace your time. So you got to count for your time. So what we do is we take that number and then we add our profit percentage on top of that. What do we want to make? Is it 20%? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? That's kind of a number you have to decide for yourself. So that's how we kind of arrive at our price. Different markets are going to command different prices. For example, there are the areas that we go to where the farmers markets are more affluent areas where folks have disposable income and they appreciate locally grown, know your farmer, know your food kind of thing. There are neighborhoods that, we don't go sell in because there's just not a lot of folks that have disposable, they're on fixed income. We tell folks, I tell folks all the time, there's the single mom out there on the fixed income that needs to go to Walmart and buy 5 dozen eggs for $5. There's the doctor, the lawyer, the IT professional, that want to come to me and pay $5 for a dozen eggs so they can tell their friends, hey, this was from a free range chicken named Bob, down the road, whatever, kind of story thing. But right now we are just some real quick numbers that we ran earlier today. I was kind of curious sort of where we were at. Right now we are spending so if we take a 265 pound pig that's 8 months old, the full retail on that animal is going to be about $1,700. If we process that animal per package, we're looking at about $1,700. We're going to spend about $500 in feed and about $420 in processing. So that's going to, we're going to land at a profit there of about $844. We take out labor, we take out fuel. We can make about $650 on a pig right now. A few years ago, we were doing much better than that because feed costs were down, processing costs were down, fuel costs were down. So we've seen a real increase in our cost. We have absorbed a large portion of that, but there's some of it that we're now starting to have to pass along to the customer. So again, depends on the market that you're in. That's kind of back of the napkin numbers where we're at today.
Okay. And I guess so, say if someone had an acre of land they wanted to use to raise pigs, what would be like kind of like a ballpark, maybe like profitability wise, then how many pigs they could raise on there? Would it be around, like $10,000 per an acre, or is that below?
So, if you were by our numbers, if you were doing 5 pigs, you'd be looking at about $3,200. So if you've done 10, about $6,400. You could do, if you had about 10 pigs, you could do about $6,400, and you really could turn that a couple of times a year. Especially if you were, bringing in 2 or 3 at a time every month and sort of had that ongoing income. And another thing, the longer, and we've discovered this, the longer you do this, the more efficient you're going to become. And the better you're going to become at raising those animals, rotating those animals, knowing when they're ready to process, not overfeeding, not underfeeding. There's a little bit of a learning curve. Doesn't take long to figure out, but the longer you do it, the better you're going to get and the more profitable you're going to get, especially as you get your infrastructure things paid off too. That makes a difference.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And yeah, kind of, I guess, going more into being more efficient over time. Like, is there like a projected amount of or estimated amount of hours every week you'd say you put towards raising the pigs then?
Yeah. So every day, we look at the animals every day. We always check feed water fence every day. On some of our feeder animals that we're raising out for slaughter, we put what's called a bulk feeder. So we'll put 2,000 pounds of feed in with those animals, and they always have access. So it's not like we have to go feed them every day. On average, we probably spend, for our feeder group, maybe 5 hours a week. I mean, and that's a very generous estimate. That's a very generous estimate. Just going out, checking, looking at them, and and another thing is spending time with those animals too. I get questions all the time. Well, what's the friendliest breed, or is which pigs are mean and that? Well, they're all friendly and they're all mean. Depends on how much time you spend with them. So my wife will literally go out in the field, take a bucket, flip it upside down, and sit on it, and let the pigs come around, and she'll feed them pears or apples or something like that. And those animals are very easy to manage. When it comes time to move them, they move well. So, 5 hours a week, and again, that's a generous estimate.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like in my head, I thought it would be a lot more hours. I thought it'd be a lot more time intensive, but it makes sense going back to what you were saying before, the most, I guess, profitable per pound animal that you could raise. What about, is there anything that you wish, like having all this experience, anything that you wish you would have known before getting started with raising pigs?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's all been on the job training. And that's really what this boils down to is on the job training. And like I said earlier, you can read everything, you can watch all the videos, but till you have those animals and you're actually doing it, that's when the learning really starts. I think the thing that I wish I would have known for that very, very first group was that training pen concept that I was telling you about. The very first pigs we bought, we brought them home and we were using some netting. It was electrified netting, and we had it set up out in the pasture. And we took that first pig off the truck and put him down that netting, and he went over and he sniffed at that electric netting, and he touched it and he went right through it. And so there were two overweight middle-aged people chasing a pig across a soybean field, which was a real sight. So that training pen, and then we got him caught, put him back on the truck, and my wife and I went to the house and had a beer, and the pig slept on the truck all night. And I emailed a friend that I've been watching on YouTube, and I said, "Hey man, what have I done wrong?" He said, "You got to set up a training pen. You got to put that 16 by 16 pin together and put your wire in there and let them learn." So that's the thing I wish I would have known for that very first day is training pin. You got to teach those pigs about the electric wire.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip, and yeah, a pretty funny story. What about, is there anyone you would not recommend to try this as like a side hustle, or even to do this as like a full-time job?
So, this is it can be physically demanding. So if, depending on your physical health, your mobility, and some of those kinds of things, I would just be aware that that managing pigs can be physically demanding. Pigs can get out. You can have to chase them and work them back to home base where they are. And that can be, when pigs decide if they get out of that wire, they're just going to go. They don't pay attention. So you may have to go a little distance. Also, whenever you go in to feed those pigs, sometimes you're talking about 250, 300, 350 pound animals, 4 or 5 of them nudging at you at the time. So, you can't be timid around them. So be aware that there are, it can be physically demanding. You're going to have a certain spot of land. You're going to have some space. This is probably not something that you could do in a development, in a neighborhood, especially with an HOA. So just be aware of that. And also, no matter where you're at, check your zoning laws and make sure that it's something that can be done where you live, that you're not in a restricted area that doesn't require it. Those are really the main things. Again, make sure you got good fence. You want to keep those animals on your property, not let them get over on your neighbor's property. So the fencing piece, that's key. That's the number one thing.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's some great tips. And yeah, I feel like definitely want to check out the ordinance laws, because I would hate for someone to go invest in all of this structure, buy the piglets, and then have the city come after them, tell them they can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just, yeah, wrapping, I guess, everything up. Do you have any, final tips for someone who's looking to get started?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great resources out there. So we've got a YouTube channel that we've done a lot of pig education on over there. It's Sherton Park Farms. So go over there and check that out. We also do some on-farm classes. We do a pastured pig class. Usually in the spring, it's a one-day intensive. We talk everything from piglets and weaning, feed, fence, water, all the way up to marketing and selling and how to do cut sheets and all of those kinds of things. Again, it's a one-day intensive thing that we do here on the farm with a lot of hands-on stuff. I've got some friends out there that also have got some fantastic resources. A good friend of mine, Troy McClung, has a podcast. It's called the Pastured Pig Podcast. A lot of education over there. He's also got a YouTube channel. And another friend of ours, Jordan Green. He's up in Edinburgh, Virginia. He's got a YouTube channel, Farm Builder, and he actually does a 4-day intensive pig class for folks that are interested in diving really, really deep. And I've gone and done that. Well worth the time, well worth the money to do. So a lot of resources out there. And reach out to these folks, reach out to me. We're always, we answer emails and text messages and do phone calls and consultation and all those kinds of things. I think you'll find some of the folks in the farming community are some of the friendliest, most willing to help share their knowledge with you that you will ever find. So find a good mentor and involve those folks in your learning process.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll definitely be leaving a link to your YouTube channel and website. So if any of the viewers want to check any of your great resources with videos or your website, we'll be having them down below. But Chuck, I just want to thank you for your time and helping myself and a lot of the viewers learn about raising pigs and what's expected and a lot of tips and tricks and how much money they could potentially make. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Kevin, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Of course. Take care. Bye.